Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for being here today. And thank you for today's hearing to examine the challenges associated with PFAS contamination across the country. Unfortunately, these issues are all too familiar to West Virginia. We've had our communities at either end of our states have faced the challenges Mr. Faber just talked about, responsibility to federal facilities. So given the volume of testimony provided to the committee for the hearing record, this issue is clearly one of national interest and significance. With my constituents in mind, I have engaged in several pieces of legislation meant to address this program, working in a collaborative and bipartisan fashion, both with Ranking Member Carper and also with Senator Gillibrand. Indeed, we've rotated sponsoring, co-sponsoring each other's legislation. But the bill that I've led, which is the S-1507, the PFAS Release Disclosure Act, would set up a process for EPA to add various PFAS to the toxic release in the TRI, toxic release inventory, subject to the completion of review. I want to get to that issue because I think it requires determinations to be grounded in science, and you've talked about science and backed by regulatory review processes that involve notice and comment. The bill does not include the entire class of the known 6,000 PFAS compounds. So getting to my question, Dr. White, I just laid out the thinking of the sponsors and of our Disclosure Act and how we designed an on-ramp, a regulatory on-ramp for inclusion of PFAS into the toxic release inventory. Is it fair to say that ACC's members are familiar with the requirements of the TRI and associated filings?
Yes, so ACC members are familiar with the TRI findings and how things should be listed. As you've kind of highlighted in your bill, we would be supportive of reviewing the TRI requirements. And so there are specific criteria that get chemicals listed on the TRI that determine whether or not there's actually an adverse health effect associated with those chemistries before they're listed. And so as a scientist, you'd have to support that science review of the specific TRI criteria to determine whether or not those specific PFAS that you have identified here in the bill actually warrant listing under TRI.
Well, I mean, obviously by my support of the three bills, I feel just of my awareness of what's happened in my particular state, I would say, obviously that's why I'm sponsoring this legislation, because I feel it does need to be included in the TRI. But let me talk about some of the misinformation out there on this bill, is that it's onerous and that it would apply to actors like mom and pop gas stations, and would feed all kinds of civil lawsuits and short circuits the EPA regulatory process. So, Mr. Faber, do you feel that S-1507 prevents these sorts of outcomes with its structured regulatory approach? Do you have an opinion on that?
No, only industrial dischargers in certain categories would be subject to your bill, Senator.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Daniels or Mr. Meehan, do you have anything to add on that point? I mean, the accountability measures inherent on the TRI will help limit or prevent emissions, hopefully relieving the remediation burdens on communities and water systems. So do you have anything to add on that point, since your stakeholders will have to deal with the contamination once it's in the water?
Yes, thank you. I think it's absolutely necessary that we get more information out to both the public and the states in terms of where these chemicals are. I know as a state we filed multiple FOIA requests in preparation for our sampling plan because we wanted to know where the highest risk was. Nobody could tell us where these chemicals were being used. And so right now there's a lack of information.
Senator, AWWA hasn't normally taken positions on TRI issues, but speaking personally, you know, TRI is the premier information-based environmental program, and I think it's a useful, hygienic way to encourage people to pursue pollution prevention, toxic use reduction through a relatively light-handed approach. The only critique that I think has some merit about TRI is that all those listed are really risk-based, and I think to the extent, again, if you're talking PFAS as a category, we would caution against that approach, but to the extent you're picking a subset of high-risk compounds, that might be worth a conversation.
Okay, well, our staffs, both Republican and Democrat, have worked with the ACC's members and the EWG to try to arrive at a solution here on S-1507. So I would ask both you, Dr. White, and Mr. Faber, if you would continue to work with us in a collaborative way so that we can find the sweet spot here in something that's very troubling.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. I'll just say this in my final 10 seconds. You know, we can sit up here and talk about CERCLA and TRI and PFAS and PFOA, and honestly, if my constituents are home or listening, they have no idea what I'm talking about. But what we're simply talking about is making sure that our drinking water is as safe as it can possibly be for us now and for future generations, because a lot of these substances stay in your water forever, or for what forever would be, very long pieces of time. So I think it's in all of our best interests to talk as simply as we can about the goals that we have in terms of cleaning up our drinking water, remediating the problems, facing the problems and being honest about it and transparent, helping small water systems when and how they need it to meet these difficult challenges, because we know that's going to be an issue. So I'm pledging to you to work with my partners here to find a way to find these answers, to make sure that our next generation don't wake up someday and find out that they've had a negative impact to something that we were talking about, you know, CERCLA and TSCA and all these other things, and not quite getting to the real answer. So that's my hope with being so active on these bills. And I thank you all for listening. Thank you.